Iran has a new supreme leader. And if you've only seen the headline Mojtaba Khamenei, you might assume this is just a normal succession story. Father dies, son takes over, new name, same system. But this is not a normal succession story, because Iran was built on the idea that it is not a monarchy, not a dynasty, not a family inheritance. And yet the man now sitting at the top is the former leader's son. So the real question isn't just, who is Mojtaba Khamenei? The real question is, what does his rise reveal about what Iran has become? In the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a clear, grounded breakdown of who he is, how he rose, why he matters, what changes and what doesn't, and the three things you should watch next if you want to understand where Iran goes from here. And I'll give you the most important takeaway right now, early. Mojtaba Khamenei isn't famous for speeches, elections, or a public career. He's famous for one thing, being close to the center of power without being seen. If Ali Khamenei was the face of the system, Mojtaba has long been described as one of the hands inside the machine. That's why his rise is less about a new era and more about a system choosing continuity under maximum stress. Now, before we go deeper, quick check. If you've already gotten value, comment what day and date you're watching this from. These moments age fast, and it's always interesting to see where people were in the timeline. All right. First, who is Mojtaba Khamenei in plain English? He's the son of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's longtime supreme leader. He's in his mid-50s, a cleric by training, and for years he's been described by journalists and analysts as a powerful behind-the-scenes figure with close ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. And that phrase, behind the scenes, is not a small detail. It's the entire story. Because in Iran, power isn't only held by whoever speaks on television. Power is held by the networks that control access, security decisions, appointments, and enforcement. It's held by the intersection of clerical authority and the security apparatus. And Mojtaba's reputation, rightly or wrongly, depending on who you ask, has been built around that intersection. Now, how does someone like that become supreme leader? Iran doesn't pick a supreme leader through a popular election. The formal mechanism runs through the Assembly of Experts, a clerical body that, on paper, is responsible for selecting and overseeing the supreme leader. But the key phrase there is, on paper. In reality, succession in Iran is a high-stakes negotiation among power centers, senior clerics, the IRGC, political elites, and the institutions that keep the state running. And this is why Mojtaba's rise matters. Not because he's charismatic, because his selection signals which power center had the strongest hand when the moment arrived. If a system chooses a public statesman, it's signaling one kind of legitimacy. If a system chooses a quiet insider with security ties, it's signaling another kind. It's signaling we are prioritizing control. Now, let's talk about why his appointment created instant debate. Iran's 1979 revolution rejected hereditary monarchy. The Islamic Republic's identity includes an anti-dynastic instinct, so naming the previous leader's son can feel, to many Iranians and many outside observers, like a betrayal of the revolution's original claim. And that tension is important because it tells you what kind of state Iran is becoming. When regimes are confident, they can afford ideological purity. When regimes feel threatened, they often choose survival over purity. That's the lens. Now, what do we know about Mojtaba's background? He's not known for holding elected office. He's not a public-facing president or minister type. Reporting over the years has described him as influential within the office of the supreme leader, and as someone who built relationships with the IRGC and conservative power networks. Some coverage has also highlighted that he kept a deliberately low profile, which makes him harder to read for the outside world. And that low profile creates two realities at once. One, it makes him harder to attack politically inside Iran, because he hasn't built a public record full of quotes and promises. Two, it makes him easier to mythologize outside Iran, because people fill the silence with whatever story they want. So let's be disciplined and stick to what we can responsibly infer. His rise suggests that, at minimum, The system believes he can unify or manage the security apparatus and the inner clerical circle enough to maintain control during crisis. Now, here's the most useful way to understand Iran's supreme leader role, because a lot of people misunderstand it. Supreme leader isn't just the most famous politician, it's the ultimate authority node. The supreme leader has influence over the armed forces, the security and intelligence architecture, key judicial and state bodies, and the overall strategic direction of the country. And that means the person in that seat doesn't just shape policy, they shape how power flows. So what changes with Mojtaba? Potentially, the balance between clerical legitimacy and security control. A lot of analysts have argued for years that Iran has been evolving from a clerical-led revolutionary system into something more like a security state structure where the IRGC's influence is enormous. If Mojtaba's selection is as closely tied to the IRGC as many reports suggest, then his rise could represent that shift becoming more explicit. In simpler terms, the robe and the uniform are becoming one structure. Now, does that mean Iran becomes more extreme automatically? Not necessarily. It could mean more controlled. It could mean more centralized. It could mean more cautious in some areas and more aggressive in others. This is where people make a mistake. They think new leader equals new personality equals instant new policy. But in systems like Iran's, a supreme leader is both a person and a symbol of the state's continuity. The system often constrains the leader as much as the leader directs the system. So the smarter question is, what incentives shape Mojtaba's early phase? And the incentives are pretty clear. In the first weeks and months of a leadership transition, especially during a war or high tension, the top priority is not reform or innovation. The top priority is to prove the system is stable. Stable means the security forces obey. Stable means the elite doesn't fracture publicly. Stable means decisions get made and enforced. Stable means nobody sees weakness to exploit. That's why early leadership transitions often look hardline, even if the long-term direction might be more complex. Now, let's talk about the international implications, because this is the other half of why the world cares. Iran's supreme leader is a key decision-maker on the biggest strategic issues: the nuclear file, regional alliances, and conflict posture. So markets, diplomats, and militaries all ask the same question when a new leader arrives. Is he predictable? And Mojtaba's low public profile makes him less predictable to outsiders. That doesn't mean he's irrational. It means there's less public data. So, outsiders tend to fall back on the strongest available signal: who seems to have backed him, and which institutions he appears closest to. If the answer is the IRGC and conservative networks, then outsiders will expect continuity and resistance posture, and deterrence messaging. Now, I want to make something very clear, because this is where misinformation thrives. A lot of content online will try to sell you a clean story. Mojtaba equals escalation, or Mojtaba equals collapse, or Mojtaba equals a secret puppet. Real leadership transitions are usually messier. A new leader has to do three things at once: manage external pressure, manage internal legitimacy, manage elite rivalries. That combination often produces contradictory behavior: tough talk publicly, quiet stabilization privately, and careful coalition management inside the state. Now, here's a quick, concrete example of how succession pressure shapes behavior. Imagine you're stepping into a role where the biggest risk isn't that you're wrong. The biggest risk is that people think you're weak. In that environment, you don't start by being ambiguous. You start by being firm. You make appointments that reassure the security apparatus. You deliver messaging that reassures hardliners. You emphasize continuity, so markets, enemies, and internal rivals don't smell uncertainty. That doesn't prove a permanent direction, but it explains the early posture. Now let's address the question everybody asks quietly: what does this mean for the Iranian people? This is the hardest part to speak about responsibly, because Iran's internal reality is complex and the information space is contested. But we can say this: leadership transitions tend to create both risk and opportunity. Risk because security forces may clamp down to prevent instability. opportunity because internal factions reposition and cracks can appear. Whether Mojtaba's leadership produces more internal openness or more internal control depends on elite cohesion, economic stress, and public pressure, forces that don't disappear because the name at the top changes. Now, the other question people ask is this a step toward monarchy? Here's the honest answer. It's not monarchy in the legal sense, but it is dynastic in the symbolic sense. And symbols matter, because symbols affect legitimacy. If a system that claimed to reject heredity now appears hereditary, it creates a legitimacy tension it must manage. And the usual way regimes manage legitimacy tension is by leaning on performance, fear, nationalism, or defiance. Which one Iran leans on most in the coming months will tell you a lot. Now, I want to give you the 3 signals to watch next. 3 things that will tell you what kind of supreme leader Mojtaba is becoming, beyond the headlines. First signal: appointments. Watch who rises inside the security and political architecture. You don't need to know every name. You watch whether the pattern points toward deeper IRGC dominance, broader clerical inclusion, or a balance that tries to keep factions aligned. Second signal: the nuclear posture. Not rhetoric, behavior. Does Iran's approach to the nuclear issue become more rigid, more ambiguous, or more transactional? Leadership changes can shift negotiating style even when core goals remain. Third signal: internal stability strategy. Does the regime's internal posture become more repressive, more concessional, or a mix? Hard security combined with selective economic or social relief? The internal strategy reveals how threatened the regime feels. Those 3 signals will tell you more than 1,000 new Supreme Leader thumbnails. Now, let's land this with a clean summary you can repeat without getting trapped by hype. Mojtaba Khamenei is Iran's new Supreme Leader, a figure long described as influential behind the scenes, with reported ties to conservative and security power networks. His rise signals the system's preference for continuity and control during crisis, even at the cost of dynastic optics that the Islamic Republic once claimed to reject. What changes immediately is the symbolism and the power balance inside the elite. What may not change immediately is the state's strategic direction, because systems constrain leaders as much as leaders direct systems. And the story you should watch isn't who he is on paper, it's what the system does through him: appointments, posture, and internal management. Now, I want your take. Do you think Mojtaba's rise is mainly about continuity, keeping the machine stable during maximum pressure? Or is it a sign that Iran's system is evolving into a more openly security-dominated state where the IRGC's influence becomes even more central? Drop your answer.